Great.
Recording for this meeting has begun.
Thank you, Stephanie, and hello. I'm Sarah Hendricks, a researcher with the Transportation Demand Management team at USF Qatar, and I will be moderating this session. And I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Stan Suchan of the Public Transportation Division, Washington State Department of Transportation. He's going to tell us about WSDOT's telework transformation, work-centered change. And we think this is an especially appropriate topic today, considering that today is Earth Day and telework has a host of potential environmental benefits. Stan Suchan is Practical Solutions Manager with more than 25 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning, transportation demand management, and public and stakeholder engagement. He leads statewide teams focused on transportation demand management and public transportation data, analytics, planning, and engineering. In addition, he serves as project manager for WSDOT's Telework Transformation, a project to sustain high levels of telework post-pandemic. Before we turn it over to our presenter, I'd like to give Brian Lagerberg an opportunity to say a few words. Mr. Lagerberg is the WSDOT Director of the Public Transportation Division, and he also serves as President of the TDM Institute that is a co-sponsor of this webcast. Brian?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning from Washington State. Just want to mention that the Transportation Demand Management Institute is one of the co-sponsors of this morning's webinar. The Transportation Demand Management Institute is a grassroots nonprofit dedicated to advancing understanding and adoption of TDM worldwide. Thank you all for being here. I think this is going to be an awesome presentation, and I look forward to Stan's presentation. Just one comment about Stan before he begins. Stan has a superpower, which is process. And in terms of advancing demand management, I hope you see the importance of process and actually getting change to happen and advancing challenging opportunities. Stan, take it away. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning from Seattle. Glad to be here. Thank you, NICR and TDMI. And I also want to start with some gratitude for the hundreds of people and the organizations that have helped support a transformation for WSDOT to a telework-friendly environment. Those include hundreds of people inside WSDOT, but also other state agencies, the Governor's Office, the Thurston Regional Planning Council, King County Metro, and other partners. It truly does take an effort with partners out there to make a big change, and we are really grateful for everyone playing the part that they play in this effort. This is a mid-project presentation, which I think is kind of fun. We're in the middle of it, in the thick of it, and we've learned a lot, and we still have a lot to learn moving forward. And so I look forward to getting into both the things we've learned and completed and the things we're in the middle of. So let's start with some basics. WSDOT is a state Department of Transportation. We are statewide, and there's just a mix of job duties. We have folks like me who do largely office work, planning, but we also have a lot of folks who work in the field where their positions aren't particularly suitable for telework. They might be able to telework once in a while, like if they have online training days or other days where they need to do document work. But you know, they're collecting tolls for ferries, they're maintaining roadsides, they're in the field overlooking construction. So we have a mix of people, some of whose jobs just are not telework friendly. Some of the conditions that aren't mentioned here are that we have strong executive support for telework even before COVID hit. We have strong executive support, and that executive support is not just one person at the top of the agency. It runs deeper than that. We also have strong employee support for telework. We had telework policies before COVID, and there were a significant number of employees who teleworked. who had tried it. Their supervisors and managers had experienced their employees teleworking. Before COVID, there was some middle management resistance, but I wouldn't describe it as widespread. But if there was resistance, it was often in middle management. And so, um, there are some performance management challenges associated with telework, and I think that's where some of that middle management pre-COVID resistance came from, where it's just figuring out how to manage employees for performance as opposed to seeing them in the office. I think some of our other challenges were outdated rules and policies. Telework really affects many silos in our bureaucracy: human resources, IT, ethics, um, all kinds, commute to production, all kinds of projects and programs touch it, which makes it complicated when you're making this kind of change, because it's not just one organization that can kind of steward it forward. There are concerns about public optics that are out there that need to be managed and addressed. And there also, some other state agencies are not in a place to do this kind of project or make this kind of change as quickly as WSDOT is. So there's conversations with labor unions, with other state agencies where different agencies are moving at different speeds. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. There are ongoing programs, and there were before COVID, to support incremental change in telework for all state workers. And WSDOT was a part of those. Thurston Regional Planning Organization had obtained grant funding and was really a great partner in that work, as was the state HR folks. Secretary Millar had issued a challenge to us to expand telework even before COVID. So those are kind of the conditions before COVID hit, and we moved radically into a significant telework environment. I have to say that our office environment, slow to change to the modern work environment. Mostly traditional cubicles and offices. There were places where we had made the change to a more modern work environment that would be more supportive for the intense collaboration required for telework. But, that is for state government, not the kind of change we can afford to make happen quickly. That is a piece of the foundation for us, that we didn't have a lot of spaces that were really modernized, nor a lot of resources to do that. And then in technology, we're largely an engineering organization, and so a lot of boxes under desks, not entirely mobile before COVID. Also, we had to launch Microsoft Teams and rapidly evolve our ability to support high levels of telework due to COVID. That wasn't happening at that rate before COVID. All right. So I did mention one thing, which was that we, had executive support, and I think this quote illustrates that. I also wanted to mention that when we changed in COVID rapidly, there was not a budget line item. There was not legislative direction. There was direction from the governor to make the change, but that didn't come with a bunch of resources. So organizations throughout WSDOT have been doing their part, more than their part. They've been doing a great job supporting the change within their span of control, which has been a real strength. They have been doing so largely within existing resources. One of the challenges we have is that when you have something that really kind of touches so many traditionally siloed parts of a very large bureaucracy, the collaboration is a challenge, and figuring out how to do that on an ongoing basis for a change like this. So there were some struggles, and continue to be struggles, with cross-functional decision making when a decision affects multiple organizations within WSDOT. That is even more challenging when you're working within existing resources. Traditional chains of command aren't always the right fit for this kind of puzzle. I also think it's important background to know that WSDOT has a largely decentralized approach to facilities. We have a facilities department, but there are facility owners throughout the state who largely manage and pay for those facilities. Our facilities department, it's not a kind of centralized control and command approach to facilities. Similarly, there's a little more centralized approach to human resources, IT, and TDM, commute trip reduction. But again, there's a lot of local ownership throughout WSDOT, the organizations throughout WSDOT. And finally, this is the kind of project that has a strong behavioral focus. So it's not a traditional engineering or construction project. There is no kind of standard manual for this kind of transformation at WSDOT. So, given those conditions, what are we doing, or how did we approach this project? Well, I think one of the key things is we are trying an Agile inspired approach. And for those of you who haven't done a lot of technology development, Agile inspired comes from that world. And what you see on the screen are some of the characteristics of that approach. I want to highlight a few of those. One of them is customer focus. And in this case, customers are employees, supervisors, management, the people in organizations who depend on us, and the general public. One of the reasons that we're using this approach is to support that cross-functional collaboration and decision-making. Not just people from different organizations, but people from different backgrounds, people from different perspectives, working together to deliver solutions. Couple of key characteristics: self-organizing teams. And in fact, for about the first 6 or 8 months of this effort, teams were created when people had a passion and wanted to solve a problem, and we brought them together from around the state to work on that. So it was largely passion driven. Since then, we've identified, and actually people were passionate about the most urgent needs. So that actually worked pretty well for us for a while. Then we kind of moved to, we have some gaps in the work where we recruited people with kind of specific missions or tasks in mind. And that actually worked surprisingly well, where kind of saying, here is the mission, who's excited to work on that from throughout the agency. And again, the self-organizing team idea worked pretty well both ways. The work is evolutionary and incremental. We're breaking the work into kind of small chunks, 3 to 12 week chunks, and really focusing on delivering something within that 3 to 12 weeks, testing and getting customer feedback over too much advanced planning. So we set a long-term trajectory, but really are letting these self-organizing teams break the work into those 3 to 12 week bite-sized pieces and encouraging all of them to do engagement as part of that work. Part of the reason we do that is because there's a lot of uncertainty here and a lot of need for employees and others to give feedback to guide this work. If you chunk it in 3 to 12 week work, then if you have a surprise, you learn something new, you can pivot with little investment or loss in that next 3 to 12 week chunk of work. So for us, it has been pretty effective, and it has helped keep us in a mindset of really letting customers help drive the work. That also has gotten us some early and ongoing delivery. For every 3 to 12 week initiative team we stood up, for example, we have 18 active initiative teams right now. They have a list of deliverables that they have to get done within the 3 to 12 weeks. And they have been doing a great job of getting those tasks done. And finally, it puts us in the mindset of better, not perfect. So in 3 to 12 weeks, advance it. And also that learning mindset of what we're going to do is try things, and we're going to be ready if we get feedback that those things aren't working to pivot and try something else, and to really work to keep all of the people working on this in that learning mindset. Again, this is more behavioral science than hard engineering. And so for us, that mindset has served us really well. The other thing that this approach of kind of the 3 to 12 week sprints, Agile inspired, has allowed us to do is it has allowed hundreds of people to participate while doing their regular jobs, while living in a pandemic. We did not have staff resources to assign to this. So for me, I'm doing this in addition to my regular job. It is a significant portion of my job, and I appreciate that Brian Lagerberg, my boss, is being generous with that, but it is not my entire job, and that's true of really everybody working on this. And so the 3 to 12 week chunk of work means when you're recruiting for people to help, it's contained. They know what they're going to do. They know their commitment. So do their supervisors. People have tended to commit and deliver on their commitment because of that kind of clarity about the next 3 to 12 weeks. And I also find that people have been able to get their supervisors to support their participation. We have had teams that have continued. They do multiple sprints back to back to back. And so there are some people who've been with us since the very beginning. There's also a core team and some others who've been with us since the beginning to provide some continuity. So the mix of kind of some people who come in, bring their strengths for that 3 to 12 weeks and then leave, with folks who've been able to stay longer has really been effective for us. So again, the benefits of this approach: more people can participate, offer their strengths and what time they're able to. It creates opportunities for volunteers to do different work than they do during their regular job. There is a mid-level engineer from the suburbs outside of Portland who is our onboarding person, so that when people volunteer for this project, they get the information they need, they find out how all this works, which is not their normal job. And she thrives on helping people get started in projects. It's not work she gets to do in her regular job, and she has been invaluable. Her name is Cecilia, and that role really fits her. She's stuck with us for 6 months now doing that work. And that's an example of that kind of opportunity to do something different. I think people also really like meeting people that they don't normally get to work with. We're a big agency, and the opportunity to do a project with someone that isn't in your office is rare for a lot of us. So I think that's been a real plus for people who've been volunteering. There's shared decision making and more support for decisions through this approach. Just more brains are better. So we have had hundreds of brains involved, some extensively, some dropping into things they care about most. And that has really helped us get to decisions and get to better decisions. All right, so now this is an overview presentation, so I'm gonna jump into some specific aspects. I believe there will be a poll. There's questions that can be, you can ask questions if you want to do a deeper dive in any of these, but I'm really going to try to do a quick overview of a whole lot of topics and let you determine where you want to do a deeper dive. So what you're seeing on the screen now is really our objectives for this telework transformation effort. We refresh our memory on these all the time. You will notice that this is a post-COVID vision. We're at a place now where post-COVID is on the horizon. How close, I don't know, but where we're really trying to work with the folks who are more focused on helping people successfully telework during COVID. There's a lot more collaboration and coordination because we're kind of headed into that transitional period. But our focus has been a post-COVID vision to try to help us contain our work and get things done to set us up for success when this transition happens. It's also very worker-centered. Those first two things are central, as is the fourth one, are central to our work. That has been our approach from the start. It has served us really well. Also on the performance side, we set ourselves a measurable performance benchmark. We did this early on in the process. It was within the first 3 months. And I would say it's doable, but ambitious. We had a team stood up to develop this, make recommendations. It went through our decision-making process. And as you can see, it's ambitious, particularly in an agency where we have a lot of workers who can't telework often at all. I will say that people get confused by this. You can read it on the screen. It has been hard to make clear that this is 30 to 40% of all employees, regardless of job suitability for telework. That is just, for some people, hard to envision how that will happen post-pandemic. But our surveys and other work have indicated that it is a challenging but feasible performance objective. We have other performance objectives that get measured, that will get measured less frequently. This is currently measured and reported on a daily basis or an ongoing basis through a dashboard. And we have other kind of surveys and other tools for things like employee satisfaction, supervisor satisfaction with employee performance. Those kinds of things are happening as well. All right, getting to decisions. Always a challenge in a large organization, but an extra challenge when you are dealing with many parts of the organization that don't traditionally make decisions together. So this is the simple structure we set up for this work last summer. So there is a core team, an executive sponsor, a steering committee, nothing radical here. The initiative teams are the foundation of the work. So the core teams really has a lot of the organizations represented that kind of own the long-term decisions. Think the IT department, human resources, the public transportation division who has commute trip reduction rules in law. Regions, the folks out in the field who do work and make a lot of decisions about facilities. Facilities is represented. And the core team's job is to make some decisions, but largely to guide the overall project and to support the success of initiative teams in getting their work done. So it's both a decision-making role and a support role. And it helps ensure alignment with the groups that kind of own the decisions long-term. The steering committee, we escalate some decisions then to that group, and they have a slightly different representation that is more oriented toward organizations where employees are delivering directly for the public. So our regions, other groups represented there that are really more delivery oriented. As opposed to the central organizations that kind of own some of these service areas. So it's a good mix. The core team escalates some decisions to the steering committee. The steering committee can make decisions, or the steering committee can say, we're going to instead make a recommendation to top executives. One of our goals here was to make sure that the organizations most affected by any decisions we make are represented in this structure, and they are. And we've been doing this for almost a year now, and folks have been continuing to be active in those groups. The initiative teams have kind of what I consider a radical mix of people. Some of our most productive initiative teams are led by employees who are not management, not high ranking in the traditional bureaucracy. And there's a mix of people from all over the state, a mix of people from different types of offices who join those initiative teams. That has been, I think, one of the strengths of this approach is because we're giving people an opportunity to work with people they don't normally get to work with and to bring and use strengths they may not get to use in their day-to-day job to this effort. It kind of busts through the hierarchy a little bit and gives many people a voice and an opportunity. They are energized by that. We have had some initiative teams melt down and need to reform, where people got into this very collaborative process and decided, ooh, this is not my thing. This is not what I thought it would be. I thought we got to make the decisions. And really, for an initiative team, they influence things very much, but they're not the decision makers. So that has been, for some people, they've said, this isn't what I want to do, or I want to try a different role next time. In terms of decisions, one of the philosophies we follow is whoever the decision maker is at whatever level, we need to get to a place where we can equip them to make a decision and have it stick. We need to involve the organizations that are most directly affected. We need to give folks the freedom to learn and adapt, meaning these decisions, we're going to stick by them, but not if they fail. And we need to get clarity as a group about where we think the decision is going to get made and what the decider will need to make that decision. So it's kind of a service approach to the decision maker. And we talk a little bit at the beginning of our initiative sprints about where's the decision going to get made so that we start thinking of those decision makers as a customer. And again, the core team is kind of a coach, advisor, resource support for those for that kind of conversation. The other thing that is important through this process is recognition. These are folks who are volunteering to do this work, and it's challenging work. And so that has been also a hallmark of this effort, is to make sure we figure out, ask people how they like to be recognized and try to do that. All right, another topic, policies. So I'm showing you some of the policies we developed in November of last year. We went through an engagement process to talk about a package or a suite of telework policies. Because telework cuts across so many traditional silos, it was really hard for people to say, hey, we should allow or not allow out-of-state telework. We should or should not allow dependent care while teleworking, without thinking about the other aspects that affect technology or affect commuter production or affect facilities or other things. So we needed to figure out a way to kind of create a set of policies where people could look at them as a package and think about those kind of connections between them. The other thing we did with these policies, with what we call the policy directives, is we produced them, and that really gave our initiative teams the clarity they needed to move forward. If they disagree or think that the policy decision we made in November is not a smart idea, they can come back through a change management process and we can change that. So they are allowed to challenge those, but generally what they have found, and many of the people working on it were involved in work groups and other things that develop these policies, the folks haven't come back and challenged those often. So we created policy directives and then moved into a phase, which we're still in now, of turning those into actual policies, written policies, guidance, and implementation of those policies. People need tools and other things to deliver those. So it's a comprehensive approach because those policies are so interrelated, and an iterative engagement process to get to our policies. The slides you just looked at are our guiding principles, and then we have a couple of pages of policies which are available in the handouts. All right, this is largely a change management and employee engagement project. Some of the things that we have found really helpful to making that successful: small, fast, focused, and iterative. That kind of 3 to 12 week sprint. Keep the group small. And if there's a lot of interest in a topic, often you can break that topic into subgroups and have people make progress. Fast, that 3 to 12 weeks, both deeply satisfying for a lot of people, but also allows some people to participate and get their supervisors to allow them to participate. Focused, having those deliverables very clearly listed really helps focus a lot of people on our teams. And iterative, meaning let's be ready to make change. If a decision or if a product surprises us, if a decision proves not to be as smart as we thought it would be, then let's iterate. Navigating uncertainty. This is tough. We are an engineering organization. We're an organization filled with incredibly smart people who lay out massive projects that are 3, 4, 5, 10 years in length and have Gantt charts and every milestone mapped out well in advance. That is not how this project works. We do have vision, we do have objectives we're trying to get to, but between COVID and its effect on employees and our brains and how we're able to work, the behavioral science behind telework and what we're learning, changing technology, all of that is a huge amount of uncertainty, and there is no manual. So really helping people be comfortable with that uncertainty and that discomfort. We've talked about techniques, or I've talked about techniques to do that, about kind of it's a learning process. Giving people the freedom to try things is really important. And finally, the gratitude and recognition part, and not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because there's behavioral science behind it. It's a more powerful technique to get to change than grit. And so continuing to not just express gratitude to people working on the project, but encourage an atmosphere of gratitude and recognition has been really important and helpful to this project. All right, so now we're going to get into more of the details. So one of the initiative teams we have is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They started, like many of our teams have started, by looking at best practices in the field. What's happening out there. And they developed a set of recommendations, and then there's another sprint who's starting to implement some of those recommendations, as well as they took those recommendations to other initiative teams to incorporate some techniques. They also helped us tap into existing groups that are bringing their expertise to the project. And so that is one way we have incorporated diversity, equity, and inclusion. The other thing that has happened is that it naturally comes up in virtually every one of our initiative teams. People talk about it, think about it, consider it in their decision making in that 3 to 12 week work. So that I think is another superpower of the national conversation about equity and diversity and inclusion, is that people are incorporating it into their work in an organic way. There's always more to learn about how to do it, always more we can do. But I think the initiative and sprint team approach has also opened the door to some folks participating and having a voice. The groups are smaller. And with more people participating, we're getting more diversity in those groups and more diversity among the mix of people participating in the groups. Another technique that we used was employee surveys. And there were a lot of questions about what employees did and didn't want. Part of my job is to manage a data analytics group. One of the things we do a lot of is surveying. Some incredibly talented folks from that group developed some employee surveys, and we learned some things that really influenced our decision making from employees. And one of the things we learned was that their employees are generally interested in continuing to telework. Another thing we learned, and let me just go to those slides. I'm forgetting to advance slides because I get talking. So this is one of the things we learned, is that when you look at the left side of this table, there's a lot of interest in sustained telework. I will say that in terms of the responses to our surveys, we did get more responses from employees who are in positions that are better suited to telework than those who aren't. So we know that there is some bias in these responses, but we did get a very good response rate. This question, nearly 2,500 employees responded to this question. So that's a very good response rate for us in that fall survey. The other interesting thing is that these numbers went up between spring of 2020 and fall of 2020. So despite kids being at home, despite the stress of a pandemic, interest in telework actually rose among employees. All right, so now we're in the real overview part. So here's a whole bunch of other topics that we've wrestled with and are working with in this project. Administrative support is very interesting. We're doing a lot of engagement to figure out how administrative staff can better support ongoing telework, shift, and can they telework? And if so, what does that look like? Would there need to be a shift in their job duties? There is an employee desire for concierge style support when in the office, particularly with shared workspaces. That's not necessarily the traditional approach for many of our administrative support staff. So we're working through, including engaging administrative support staff in figuring out what these changes mean and how they can help that staff advance their careers and thrive. Collaboration and culture, I have to say, the extroverts, this has been a rough year for extroverts. And this is not easy for them. The office will never be the same. And so for some of our folks who are extroverts who love in-person collaboration, thrive on it, that's part of why we made the policy decision to say telework is voluntary, not mandatory for employees. But that doesn't mean that the office is going to be the same when they go back. So a lot of thinking about those collaboration needs. We have a team on collaboration and culture kind of starting to work through the details of that. A lot of discussion about what about new employees, those who've started in the past year and those who will start. There's a need for training, for coaching, for informal learning, and for them influencing culture with their coworkers. There is the looming problem of you need face time to get ahead in the workplace. We're aware of that trend. And we don't know what the right balance of telework and in-office collaboration will be. And we don't have a chance to experiment with that and learn from that yet. Electronic records, one thing we have found is there's a printing problem. There are certain jobs and certain individuals in terms of their preferred way to work where printing is crucial. It's a real barrier to telework. And so our policy on electronic records has not caught up with technology and telework. It's also very challenging and very complicated. You get into laws that require certain things that require printing or processing paper. So there's been progress on that, but we need to continue that focus. And we're really trying to focus it on certain jobs where that's the biggest barrier. On facilities, how do you create a modern work environment on the fly? How do you adapt for a looming transition when people really can't go into the office yet to help with that adaptation? And what does that look like? Real challenges, teams chipping away and working on that. Incentives. Do we need financial incentives or subsidies or not? And if we need them, how should we do them? Do they create an equity issue? We have employees whose jobs aren't well suited to telework. Is it suddenly an equity issue that other workers who, like me, have jobs that are telework friendly are getting an incentive, and employees who are in lower wage jobs don't have that option? And similarly on incentives, public optics, a real challenge. Operating shared spaces. We've acquired a new technology for drop-in spaces that we're just starting to use or to figure out. And it creates a whole new set of roles and responsibilities that are non-traditional, particularly when those shared spaces are shared across organizations that haven't shared space before. Out-of-state telework, liability, taxes, workers' compensation, more complicated than you could imagine. And a lot of demand. We have not yet written our policies for that. We have a team stood up that's working on that, but it's a real challenge, and one that's very important to a significant number of employees. Staff development, back to the new employees, how does this work? And how do we make sure that they have a satisfying experience? If recruitment and retention is one of our key objectives, this is a big one for us. And we also have the idea of telework as is it a right, or is it something that you can take away for poor performance? And would you want to take it away as a result of performance? Is the performance issue related to you're working from home? If you were sitting in the office where very few people might be in the future, will that help you improve your performance or not? So we have things to work through on that. And finally, technology. I do want to say our IT department has been amazing. They're not the only ones, but they have been extraordinary in this effort. One way they're extraordinary is deal making. They have worked very hard to find ways within existing budgets to get technology we need. And some of that was some great negotiating. And some of that was policy making. And they have an ability to move changes forward in a thoughtful way with engagement. They're very well practiced at that process, and kind of baking that in to the process we have to engage even more people is something they've done quite artfully. We're doing a gradual move to mobile devices, dual monitors, people taking monitors home, equipping collaboration spaces. The crisis of the pandemic really expedited that, but now we need to figure out what does it look like in the office when even furniture, chairs, desk chairs, and monitors have gone home with people. Also, remember those boxes under the desks. How do we move people over to mobile devices as quickly as we need to? We submitted a budget request to help us expedite that. It is um, currently not in the budgets that we're seeing our legislature considering. So figuring out that contingency plan to move that over, some of that comes back to deal making. Um, can we uh, can we make some changes to our standard technology affordably to help expedite that? So that is the world's biggest overview. Um, touching on a lot of things, not a lot in depth. I do want to remind you, I think there is a poll coming up about topics you'd like to do a deeper dive on. I also want to encourage questions, and Sarah will moderate those. And oh, there's the poll that shows things you might want to do a deeper dive on. By the way, if you are interested and there are future webinars, there are folks both in my department but also around the country who have awesome expertise to do a deeper dive in these topics. So please take that poll because it would be great to hear from some other folks on these topics.
Okay.
I
Well, Stan, go ahead. I'm sorry. You gonna say
no,
something else?
I was going to say, I think it's your turn, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Well, Stan, this was really great. This was an awesome presentation. And I think, with such a large organization, just the comprehensiveness of the approach that you're taking and also just identifying the many complexities that you're juggling here. This has just been really informative to us. And we do have a number of questions. So I'll dive right into those as people are also working on this poll to identify those issues that they'd like to take a deeper dive into. So the first question is, how do you get customer or employee feedback on the incremental work as part of the Agile inspired approach? And I think that's when you were talking initially about the small self-initiated groups.
So some of that is that the work is being done by small self-initiated groups, but we have played around a lot with engagement techniques, in particular techniques to allow ad hoc participation. I mean, some people, their jobs are so intense, and COVID made it even more intense that they can't join an initiative team. So we have found that using Microsoft Teams, that has been helpful. Small group discussions are key. 2 or 3 people using a discussion guide where you walk them through a process and having a purpose for their workshop. At the end of this workshop, you will produce a certain thing. Iterative, kind of having a series of those where you walk through, particularly for the policy directives, but really on space design and other aspects. People need time to process information, and in those small groups, they influence each other so that we're not convincing people what is or isn't a good policy. They're working through it and convincing each other. Those groups using Microsoft Teams, they take a little effort to organize, but it's surprisingly efficient. And once you develop a discussion guide, we've literally done hundreds of small groups as part of this project. And you will find people in your agency who thrive on facilitating those groups, are great at it, capture the data, and then we've also been working on our techniques to analyze that kind of qualitative data and use it.
Okay,
I,
great.
I love I love that part. It's really fun.
So the next question is, can you provide a copy of your project planner initiative teams and deliverables?
I will do that. I'll do that after this session is over.
Okay.
We have
The
a
next,
standard one-page template. Oh, that it's worth saying. We have a standard template that's about 1 page or 1.5 page for an initiative team. We find that that is enough to guide the team, but not so much detail that it takes away a team's ability to kind of own the topic, own the project. So it creates that balance of here's what you need to get up and running, but not so much that you feel like, you don't have some control.
Okay. The next question has to do with performance. Why the specific percentage of people working remotely? Is there something driving those targets that have been set?
Yeah, when we had a team develop those performance targets, and so we did engagement around kind of here's options for performance targets and here's what they mean. Part of the reason we really felt we needed it was it helps all of the teams figure out kind of where they should go, how far should they go. So, for example, a topic like ergonomics, how do you figure out where to put your resources in ergonomics if you don't have some idea of how many employees are going to be teleworking and how frequently? Facilities, furniture, that kind of work, it's like, how many are we talking about here? And that gives those teams an idea as they're recommending their changes, their policies of kind of how big the group is going to be. So it has been really helpful that way. It also gives us the ability to say, are we kind of on target or not on an ongoing basis? Do we need to amp up some things if our numbers are too low? Or or are we finding that we need to change our target based on employee input? It, it mostly was so that our teams kind of had an idea of whether their work was, too cold, too hot, or just right. And it's been really helpful for that.
Okay. The next question is, do you have all hands meetings throughout the organization that require most employees to be present in the office? And if so, how are or will you handle those?
Uh, different organizations approach that differently. I know a lot of organizations have converted them to teams and are playing with that idea, but other organizations are really looking forward to kind of having collaboration days. We have a group that's kind of working on providing some guidance, but I think that's going to be an area where groups will need to experiment, and we'll need to learn once we're able to experiment with that and advance some best practices within the agency. It is something that I think groups are eager to try. I know that the work groups that work for me are really looking forward to kind of those all hands days in the office and even having them scheduled a couple of times a month so that we can have that informal conversation. We also talk about are there other organizations where we want to coordinate it so that we're there on the same day so that we can have that kind of informal collaboration with them as well.
Okay. The next question is, what recommendations do you have for organizations that want to move confidently in the direction of embracing more remote work, but may not have a clear idea how?
I hate to say this, but it's good old fashioned start with a charter or a project brief, put it in writing, develop it with a team. It's kind of the good old fashioned way to start a new initiative. And it really works. People don't love it. Many people don't love it because you're talking about the project instead of just doing the stuff. We found that there were lots of people doing this stuff while we were starting the project, and that's fine. That kind of dual approach of, hey, IT, keep working to improve the technology for teleworkers while we stand up this team, that's okay. There's some discomfort in that. Just take a deep breath. But that project brief, which I believe is in the notes, has been invaluable for us to say, this is where we're going together and stopping and creating the organizational structure, the agile inspired approach, our objectives. The project brief was done, and then we started developing our performance objectives and our measurable targets. So we didn't wait for that. We got kind of consensus on where we're headed and then stood up a team to do that. So developing a team of people to develop that document is a powerful first step in the process. Not everybody's favorite. I love it.
Okay. So the next question is regarding change management. Did you have a change management lead or advisor? And if so, was that person full-time on this effort for some period?
We have a communications and change management initiative team that is, I believe, on their third or fourth sprint. And we combined communications, which is largely employee communications, and change management together. And so that team has had some turnover, but there have been kind of a core of folks who are have been on that team from the start. And so, no, we do not have a singular designated full-time change manager. We have a lot of folks who are really thoughtful about change management in general, and then we have access to people who are better trained at it, who coach, advise, and help us. So we kind of do an interesting combination through the sprint team approach.
All right. And then I think you had touched upon performance. Um, what productivity metrics have you used? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Uh, Most of what we have measured is through surveys of supervisors. So that has been pretty limited. There's, of course, anecdotal feedback you get, and managers and executives get that. They hear about it if there are struggles happening in terms of delivering for the public. But in terms of our measuring it, it has been mostly by asking supervisors about their team's productivity in an anonymous survey. And we'll continue that approach. But that is an area that I think we can challenge ourselves to do more. We just prioritizing, resourcing, never enough.
Okay, great. The next question is, what does a concierge style office mean?
A concierge role, so it's interesting because that is a role that has emerged in shared workspaces in the private sector, and our employees started talking about the kinds of services they would like in a shared workspace. So it really is the idea that on the days when I come into a shared workspace, there is somebody there to help me, somebody on site that can help me if I'm struggling to connect, that can help me if there's a conflict, the room I reserved, there's another group in it, or to understand which focus rooms are available to me. Somebody there if I need to map to a printer or get something printed. Just how do I function productively as quickly as possible in this space? Somebody to help you with that. Um, and that is, and it could be anybody using the space. Many of our administrative positions are really focused on a work group and doing tasks to support a specific work group. That's kind of changing as we evolve. And so really working with our administrative staff and others to figure out how there's a new business need emerging as we move to a more shared workspace. Other interesting topics are, we're going to be dropping in at WSDOT facilities that aren't even a shared workspace. If I'm out in the field, I think we're going to find that employees are going to be dropping in more to WSDOT facilities where they wouldn't have thought to even drop in there before. So I think this is going to be one of those things we're going to have to experiment once office is open, and we will learn some things from folks who are dropping in and from the folks who are experiencing the drop-in employee.
Okay. I think we're starting to get very close to the end of our hour. I wanted to remind everybody that there are some documents that you can download if you'd like. The policy brief, and I believe that your screen has now moved to an evaluation. Stephanie, did you want to say a word about this?
Yeah, I just opened the evaluation in case you needed to jump off a couple minutes early. The evaluation has opened up on your screen. If it has not, just simply locate the web link section, locate the evaluation button and click Browse To, and that will open up the evaluation on your end. The feedback provided in that evaluation is very important to Stan and our presenters, and I know that there are quite an additional number of questions still in the Q&A box. So Sarah, did you want to just kind of oops, Sarah seems to have dropped off real quick. Stan, do you have a minute to take another question or two?
I sure do.
Okay.
Oh,
Sarah, are you back?
yes, I didn't realize that I that I had dropped off. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
I think Stan has agreed to answer another question or two, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Okay, let's see here. There's a question. I have seen part of the equity issue framed as, if position A cannot telework due to their duties, then it cannot be equitable to allow position B to telecommute. So how do you navigate that?
My focus really is can you complete the job duties while teleworking? And there has been some concern expressed about people who are misperceptions about telework. I think it's a lot of communications, a lot of engagement. But it's also, if telework is crucially important to someone, then it's really a conversation with supervisors and others to say, how do you take your career in that direction then? I think thinking of telework as some sort of perk, it's still work. Some people, it's a really important perk. For other people, they really thrive on an environment where they're out in the field. So I think that's a challenge. But in terms of equity issues, it's not our central challenge. I think our central challenge is making sure that customer needs are being met, that employee needs are being met, that if employees who rely on the services of folks who are teleworking are getting what they need to do their job. We have a lot to work through on that. I think that's one that will be an emerging issue when we return to offices. I think we're going to hear more about it and learn more about it.
Stan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the telework program at the Washington State Department of Transportation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else has as well. And I'm back to Stephanie.
Again, thank you so much, Stan and Sarah and Brian today for all of your efforts and your remarks about the telework program. I did again remind you to please take a few moments to complete that evaluation, as that feedback provided is very important to Stan and our NICR webcast series. As a quick reminder, tomorrow we have a webcast as part of our Friday Transportation Seminar Series, testing autonomous vehicles with naturalistic and adverse driving environment. That there is no adversarial driving environment. There is no pre-registration for that webinar. It is just a drop-in for a Teams meeting, so that information is provided in the web link section. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you real soon. Bye, everybody.